Hello and welcome back to part 2 of my NHL draft coverage. Last video we covered my top 10 picks. Now we're going to do picks 11 to 20. This video should be a little bit shorter because I don't have as many thoughts on players as we kind of move down the draft. But we'll try to keep it a bit more concise as well. So quickly jumping right into my number 11 prospect in this year's draft. I have Beckett Seneca at number 11. Most of the sports books seem to agree that he's going to go around 11. So I feel pretty good about this ranking at least. And I think when you're talking about Beckett, the first thing that kind of jumps out at you is his confidence. He plays just with an uber confidence, especially in the second half of the season, and for good reason. I mean, he has a fantastic shot. He's a really good forward checker. He has great takeaway ability too. He's very good at getting the puck off of opponent sticks. But the concerns around him, and the concerns that a lot of people have, was the incredibly slow start that he had to the season, where he started the season with 25 points in 28 games, and that jumped up to 43 points in the last 35 games of the season. And it was a massive jump, and a lot of people have accounted it to him finally learning how to use his body properly and develop with the growth spurt that he had before the season. And I think that definitely was part of it. But another big part of it is Callum Ritchie coming back. And his explosion in points kind of aligns with that return. And when you're getting, a high-end player like that back, it definitely does help you become more confident and feel better about it. And obviously it'll lead to point totals as well. We all know that point totals aren't necessarily a individual stat. Even in that second half of the season, I still saw quite a bit of clumsiness in his game. And I think he at times he can lack defensive compete. But overall, I think you're getting a bit more of a project player here than you might like to get at 11. But the talent's certainly there, and he definitely showed that in the second half of the season. And there's been sparks of what could be a really good top six forward. And I think at 11, I'm willing to kind of take that shot that the second half of the season is who he is, and it's not just a good run. At this point in the draft, this is where you need to take, kind of your shots. And I might be higher on Seneca than a lot of people are. I know I've seen some people have him as low as the late 20s, which I think is a little crazy. And I've seen people have him in the top 10, which I wouldn't quite take him in the top 10, but I feel like just outside of the top 10 is kind of a good spot for Beckett, and I wouldn't be surprised if he goes slightly earlier than that or right around 11th overall. So at number 12, I have Sam Dickinson from the London Knights. Initially, the point of game, 70 points in 68 games, jumps out to you right away, but there's a lot of his game that kind of ties into that as well. He's also a very good rush stopper. That was one of the things that stood out to me immediately, was the fact that his ability to kind of hold people up at the line and don't even let them get entry or force a dump in were super apparent. His ability to kind of hold that line was very good. Obviously, he's got a very good shot. That's something that jumped out to a lot of people, even at the Memorial Cup. Smooth skater. Another thing that really stood out, especially during the Memorial Cup as well with London. He also uses his range to gap up on opponents, and that kind of goes back to the rush stopper ability, is just his ability to use his frame and use his size to make the ice smaller than it is for his opponents, and that's something that a lot of big defenders struggle with, honestly. I mean, it's something that Tyler Myers has struggled with for a lot of his career, and that's why he's not a great defender, because although he's 6'7" or whatever Tyler Myers is, he's never really learned how to use that to his benefit, and Sam Dickinson can already kind of do that. So I'm not trying to compare him to Tyler Myers. That was just the tall, poor defenseman that came to mind. He's very good at distributing the puck at speed, but he has trouble seeing plays when the pace kind of slows down. He's very much things have to be quick. As soon as you kind of get into a kind of more methodical style, Dickinson seems to struggle with that. and that's something that he's going to have to work on. But at speed, in transition, Sam Dickinson's been really good at that. So I think that's kind of something that matters. He's also not consistently creating good looks, and I think just lacking consistency in general is a big thing in Dickinson's game. There'll be games where you'll look at him and he'll look like the best defenseman in the draft, and there's other games where he doesn't even look like a first-round talent. And I think the reality lies somewhere in the middle there. The talent is clearly there because he's had those nights where he's looked like, he could be a top 3 pick, but he's extremely raw, and whoever's drafting him is going to have to take the time to kind of slowly massage him into their system and work on that development. And he's somebody you're going to have to keep an eye on and make sure that he's doing those right things and he's starting to kind of pick up on a lot of those trends. So it is a project player. But again, I think there's enough talent there where the upside, if he works out, is a top pairing defenseman. And I don't think his ceiling, I don't think his floor is super low either. So again, at 12, I think I'm willing to kind of put that commitment in and try to make it work. Any higher than this, I probably wouldn't do it. I don't think there's enough potential upside to spend like a top 10 pick and then have to spend a bunch of development time on him. I'd want somebody who's more refined already, I guess. But just outside of the top 10, again, I think there's enough like first pairing upside that you take the shot and you hope, you believe in your development team, essentially. And I think there's a lot of good in Sam Dickinson's game. I think there's a lot of, it's mostly just finding consistency and making that good come out more often than not. My next player at number 13 is Liam Greentree. And I mean, like, initially looking at the Windsor Spitfires point totals kind of tell you a lot that you need to know about Liam Greentree. And I mean, his 90 points compared to their second best scorer having 66, really, he was a one-man show in Windsor this year. And that came through very well. And I think it's there. I don't think there was a player in this draft that did more with less than Liam Greentree. And that says a lot because he was very often getting like double teamed pretty well the whole game because there was nobody else really to defend, and he still put up 90 points. Like, he was still very much a threat every single night. And this is somebody that I think in a better system with a better team around him is easily looked at as like maybe even higher than this in the draft. He also has a very good two-way game. He can also play defense pretty well. He gets back with pace as good as he can with pace, but we'll get into that in a second. But he's somebody who he's not one-dimensional. He has to do everything, really, with the team that he's on. And I think that's benefited his development because he's learned how to be responsible and not make a ton of mistakes. And that's something that's been kind of a highlight. I mean, he's a great puck protector. That was something that really stood out to me, too, is especially considering the team that he was on, he really didn't turn the puck over a whole lot. And he was very good at using his body to shelter it in the offensive zone and make sure opponents couldn't disrupt him as much as possible. But the big knock on Liam Greentree is his speed. He is incredibly slow, especially for somebody who could be a fringe top 10 pick. And I'm kind of betting on the fact that he develops like a lot of players do and just kind of gets that second gear eventually. And we've seen it before. I mean, we've seen plenty of players go into the draft and be called slower than they should be at this age, and then all of a sudden, right before they leave junior, they figure it out and they get this second and third gear. I'm kind of hoping that Greentree does that, because if he does, like, man, you're getting a very, very good quality forward here. And again, like, you're going to see throughout this video, this middle of the first round kind of area is where I'm willing to kind of take more flyers on players at this point because of the upside. And similar, I mean, Seneca and Dickinson, right? They both have those development concerns. And Greentree, I think, is in the same spot. And I think, again, at this point in the draft, there's going to be big flaws pretty well with everybody. And the skating is definitely green trees. And if he can get that second gear, the third gear, man, I mean, he's got top 6 forward written all over him easily. Like, especially on a team where he can be the guy, right? Where he doesn't have to be the guy, right? Where you can put him around other talented players, and they're taking a lot of that workload from him. So he's an interesting player. At 13, I'm comfortable with it. Probably wouldn't be comfortable anywhere higher than that. But other than the skating, like, I think you have a very good player here, and that's something, again, that you can develop. And hopefully he does, because I really like his game. So number 14, I have Anton Salayev, and 11 points in 63 games in the KHL doesn't jump out to you at all, but I mean, his build does. Physically, this guy is an absolute monster. And that's kind of going to be the draw for a lot of teams, is his size. And he's an extreme... I think the Hockey News had him like 4th in their rankings, which I think is insane. And we'll get into that. And I'm going to kind of rip on Salayev here. It's going to sound like I don't like him, but again, I have him 14th. Like, that's a very high-end player in this draft, right? Like, I think he's the 14th best player in this draft. So let's talk about the good in Salayev first of all. I mean, obviously his physical build is crazy, but he's also a high-end skater, especially for his size. He's a fantastic skater. Obviously, he brings physicality. He's able to use his body. He's an excellent defender. He's the best defensive defenseman in this draft, I think. But you move to all the concerns now. I mean, there's concerns about him being able to read plays at NHL level. There's been situations, even though he's looked like a very good defender at most times in the KHL, there's been times where he's gotten burned with creative plays, and that probably goes up in the NHL. He's a huge project player too. I mean, you're drafting him for the physical tools and the innate defensive ability that he has, but you're hoping that defensive ability isn't just because he's big, and in the KHL he's kind of exploiting that. It's going to get taken advantage of in the NHL if that's the case. But he's an extremely raw talent, and like, similar to Dickinson, you're looking at a pretty big development curve, right? Although I think Salayev projects with more consistency than Dickinson does. Just the absolute black hole of an offensive game that Salayev has is enough for me to have him this low. Like, although he could become a very high-end defensive defenseman, the offensive game just isn't there, and I don't think he's going to be somebody who puts up 40, 50 points as a defenseman. That's just not going to be who he is. And, like, if you're taking a top 10 pick, like, you want somebody who's going to be a game breaker, or at least as close to a game breaker kind of organizational changing player as you can get in this draft, and Salayev's just not that. He's going to be a very good complementary player somewhere, but I don't see a number one defenseman here because he lacks that offensive side of his game. And in today's NHL, you can be a number one defenseman if you're black hole defensively. You can't really be a number one defenseman if you can't put up points. Like, that's just the way the NHL is at this point. And you have a super raw talent who doesn't have a very good offensive game, but the physical tools are there. He's an interesting player. I definitely think he goes higher than 14. Again, this isn't a prediction. This is my rankings. I think for sure he goes higher than 14. If I had to, like, put money on it, like, I'm betting the house that he goes ahead of where I have him. And I get why a team's going to reach on him. I wouldn't. I think there's enough, especially defensively, I think there's enough talent in this draft where you don't have to try to take a player like this who doesn't have that offensive upside. If he was flipped and he was terrible defensively and had a huge offensive upside, then maybe I would, that changes it. But I just don't think there's enough value in taking a pure defensive defenseman this high in the draft, or at least this high until 14, I guess. He's an interesting player. He's a fascinating player. It's going to be a very interesting development cycle, whoever gets him. I like him. I love him at 14. I don't like him in the top 10, purely because I don't think there's enough, like, there's not enough ceiling here. There's not enough runway to make especially with how raw he is, like the development time is going to be significant, I think. And not in like the case where I don't think he can play in the NHL this year or next year, but in the case that like it's going to take time for him to move into like playing heavy minutes, like actually being that true shutdown defender. And spending a top 10 pick and all that development time on a player who's probably maxing out at like 30, 35 points, I don't think is worth it. But at 14, I'd take the shot. The physical tools are there. He's a unicorn. Give it a go. So at 15 is Trevor Connolly. And Trevor Connolly is an interesting player. Talent-wise, I can make a case Trevor Connolly should be like 8th on my list, right? Like I'd probably put him ahead of Yzerman, if I'm doing this purely based on ice talent. The issue of Trevor Connolly is everything else, and whether you think it should be an issue or not. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, like there's a really good Katie Strang Athletic article about it. But it's essentially like he posted some things on social media he probably shouldn't have, and then he's been accused of things that you shouldn't be doing in the hockey rink a couple times. I think it was multiple times for the accusations. Those he's denied. He's apologized for the social media posts, which is fair. Like I obviously I'd have him draftable. I have him 15th on my board, but whether you think those should be concerns or not, and they should hurt his draft stock or not, it's going to, right? Because this is a business, and people are going to not like that you take a player like this. And I think that needs to be accounted for in his ranking. And there's also been a lot of concerns about him as a character in general in the locker room, aside from all the other stuff. But again, I'm not in the room. I don't have the character issue in locker room stuff. I don't really buy a whole lot into those rumors because I'm not there. So you kind of all just secondary sources. But I mean, as an on ice talent, man, Trevor Connolly he's special. Like he's a human highlight reel. He's fantastic in space. He has a super high end shot. His elite speed helps him in transition. He's super creative. He's not very physical and he's poor defensively, but that's just kind of what you get with most high-end wingers like this that are like pop, like highlight reel offensive players. And I think there's value there. Like I think you're getting a pretty secure, like high-end offensive forward in this draft with Trevor Connolly. The question is which team is going to want to take the risk on that. And if the accusations that have been laid against him as a player aren't true, then yeah, whoever gets him is in for a real good treat, especially if he does end up falling, especially past 15, which I definitely could see happening. And if he's learned from his mistakes, then hey, like, perfect. Let's go. But that's the question, and we won't know the answer to that, and no team knows the answer to that, and that's kind of the issue. Because if you're going to burn a high-end pick on somebody, you want to make sure they're actually going to play for you. So Trevor Connolly is an interesting one. He's definitely one of the most polarizing players in the draft, simply because of that. I think 15 is a good place to do it. Any lower than that, and I'd for sure be taking him just because of the on-ice ability. But I totally understand people also not wanting him on the draft board because, again, whether you agree with that or not, it is going to be a huge distraction for whoever drafts him, and it's going to be the story. Like, the second he gets drafted, that's going to be the first thing anybody on TV talks about, and you have to live with that. So we live in a world now where that kind of media backlash is just the way it is, and teams need to account for that, and I'm accounting for that and where I have him in my ranking. But on ice talent, man, like Trevor Connolly's special. So take with that what you will. I have him 15. I think that's fair. So at 16, I have Mikkel Brunsing-Nygaard, and this is where my board kind of transitions to the next tier of players. I think we're kind of out of the like true realistic top 6 forward, top pair, kind of top 3 defensemen on a team. I think this is kind of where you move into that second tier of roster players. Not the second tier in the draft. This would be like my 4th tier in the draft, but like second tier of, you know what I mean. And we start off with Nygaard, who I think is like the ideal middle 6 forward. Like this is like your true middle 6 guy. This is the guy in the draft where I think this is the second guy, really. I've mentioned this before in my last video. This is the second guy that I think like the analytics community is just gonna like fall in love with. He's just that kind of perfect defensive forward. I think he's probably the best defensive forward in the draft. And he's just the guy that's going to do all the right things, like all the little things super well. He's going to drive play fantastic. He's very good at that. He's an excellent skater. Obviously, like I said, great defensively. But he has that low offensive ceiling, right? Like, he's not super flashy. He's not... he's kind of like Hellenius, where I think you're looking at a guy who the numbers people are going to love because he's going to have great underlying numbers. But the casual audience might not appreciate as much because he's not going to go out and score 50 goals. He's not going to go out and put up 100 points. He's not going to be, a first-line winger generating offense every time, right? But he's going to do all those little things right, and people are going to be screaming to give him more ice time. He'll be playing on a third line somewhere and doing very good at it. That's just kind of who I think he is. But yeah, I mean, the concerns are obviously the offensive ceiling. I think it's fairly low, and he lacks physical consistency. But again, I think he's still the best defensive player in the draft, probably. So that hasn't really hindered his defensive play yet. I don't see it being an issue because he's been this good already without it. So I think he'll be fine in that case. But yeah, Nygaard's one of my favorite players in the draft. He's definitely my favorite player in like this tier, the first round. Not just because I have him 16th, but like just in style of play and everything. Like, I really, really like him. I just don't think there's enough pop there to have him higher than this, but I really like. He's very fun as somebody who appreciates players who can do all the little things really well and can be kind of quieter but super effective. Like, Nygaard's one of my favorite players in this draft. So shout out to him. I have him 16. If you haven't been familiar with his game, go watch some clips because he's fun. Like, if you're into the kind of the nitty gritty, like film breakdown kind of stuff, he's a super fun player to do that on. Just because of him being very good at all those little things. So number 17, I have Carter Yakimchuk, who's a super fun defenseman. Anybody who watched the WHL this year was immediately familiar with him, and he popped. And it's funny going from Nygaard, who's like super subtle in the things that he does right, to Yakimchuk, who's like extremely loud in the things that he does right. It's very evident what he does very well. Like watching like one shift from him, it's like his skills are like they just pop to you. And the first one is his great shot. He is a fantastic offensive tool, and his shot is one of the biggest pieces of that. He has range, he has accuracy, which is all you really want from somebody who could potentially run a power play as a defenseman. He's also a high-end puck handler. Like, any of his offensive plays, like, he's creating in the offense zone. He'll get the puck, and then he'll move up into space, dangle around a defender, and find room to get a good shot off. So he's not just taking bad shots, he's creating his own space and making those situations open up. He brings a very heavy physical game as well, but he's just kind of okay defensively overall. So the physical game's there, but he needs to kind of work on his spacing defensively, his decision making, his coverages, pretty much everything else. But he's fine. He's not bad in any sense of the word. He's also super puck dominant, which in the Canadian Hockey League could be a good thing. But as you move up higher, you kind of need to learn how to distribute as well. And I don't know if he has that game yet. He also lacks explosiveness skating. His skating is his ability to find space and create space is fine, but when he gets into open ice, he's kind of slow, which could be a concern if he's going to be driving rushes in the NHL, right? Like, he either needs to get another gear or he needs to learn how to not be as puck dominant. Those are kind of the two options. His hockey sense is also pretty average, I'd say, mostly without the puck. I mean, with, like, again, his puck skills are great, but his decision making isn't fantastic. And yeah, I mean, like, positioning's been a big thing, especially in front of the net. I think his ability to clear the net kind of raises concerns. Defensive positioning in general is kind of an issue. And again, I think that goes back to the hockey sense and the okay defensive game. There's a ton of high-end offensive potential here, though, and he needs development time. He needs the ability to kind of learn these things. He needs to learn how to make better decisions with the puck. He needs to learn how to use increase his speed and be able to take advantage of those opportunities fully when the ice opens up to him. He needs to learn how to be better positioned defensively. These are all things you can teach, but again, you just have to invest the time to do it. And at 17, the potential for a huge offensive kind of player defensively here is great enough. And again, like, the inefficiencies in his game outside of maybe the speed are pretty teachable. It's just a matter of whether or not they actually click with the player, and you can teach them, and like he retains it. So we'll see. But at 17, I think you're getting a fantastic potential offensive player. And again, like, I think offensive defenseman is kind of the wave of the future, and Carter Yakimchuk's one of those players who could be a very, very big help to a team's, like, second pair maybe. At number 18, I have Igor Chernyshov, and this begins my run of forwards for the next little bit. And Chernyshov is fun. He has a super high IQ. He's a very smart player. He's a very strong defender. He's great off the rush. He's a pretty good two-way game. The big knock that I have on Chernyshov is he needs to be more creative. He's very simple in the offensive zone especially. And I know there's this huge inherent bias that everybody has when talking about Russian players, that they're, like, extremely creative and fancy, and Chernyshov kind of, like, flies in the face of all of those because he's great defensively and he's not creative enough. So it just kind of shows you that those biases aren't actually real, and you should evaluate players individually and not based on where they're born. Anyway, Chernyshov is somebody who is comfortable playing lower in a roster already. He plays in the bottom six in the KHL, and he's done really good at that role, and he seems to be able to slide into that very comfortably already, which is good because I think that's most likely where he'll end up on an NHL roster, especially if you can't increase that creativity with the puck, which at this point it's kind of hard to, like, develop that. But again, I think he's got a very well-rounded skill set. He just kind of lacks those elite top-end skills. And for somebody who could slot into a bottom six and has already proved that he can do it in the KHL, yeah, that's solid. That's good that he already has that experience in a professional league too, right? Because most players, when they're coming out of junior, like the NCAA or the Canadian Hockey League, especially if you're going to be a top first or second round pick, like, you're playing top line or second line at worst, right, on your team. Like, nobody's getting picked in the first round that's playing, like, third line for the Brandon Wheat Kings. Like, that doesn't happen, right? So very rarely anyway, at least like in a third line like checking role. Whereas Chernyshov's kind of already doing that in the KHL, and that transition to the NHL and being thrown into that role should be pretty easy transition for him, and I think that's a good fit. So yeah, I mean, he needs to kind of develop everywhere to become a top 6 guy, and I don't think that's super likely. Although I think there is like maybe like a small percentage chance that it happens. I think it's very likely you're getting a very good bottom 6 forward here. And at 18th overall, I don't think you can really complain about that, right? Like, people are going to sit on draft day and say like, oh, this guy's got so-and-so potential, and everybody that goes in the first round is a top-end talent because it's television and they need to hype up what's going on. But I think you're getting a very good bottom 6 forward in Chernyshov, and I think that's okay. At 18, whoever's picking like bottom of the first round is usually looking for complementary players anyway, unless you trade up and you're a rebuilding team, but you get what I mean. So that's good. Like, that's a fine, he's a very good role player, and at 18 I like him. At 19 I have Andrew Basha, who has the skill set that looks like he should be a top 6 guy in the NHL. I don't know if it's translatable as much as some people think. He has great playmaking ability. He's super agile, very creative with the puck. But he relies on his speed too much, and I think those lanes are going to close up at a higher level. Obviously in junior, you can kind of get away with just being super fast, and you're going to burn most people because most people you're playing against aren't going to even be close to the NHL. But I do think those lanes kind of close up on him, and I have trouble predicting him as a top 6 forward, as a true top 6 forward. But I think he's got the tools to be a bottom 6 guy and succeed in the NHL. As kind of like a secondary scoring, like, third liner who can be physical. Think about kind of like, this is a bad example because I don't think their play styles are very similar, but like just in terms of role, like what Blake Coleman was in Tampa Bay when they won the Cup, where he's just covered like Yanni Gord, where they can add that offensive consistency, but they're like, they have the skill set to play in a bottom 6, if that makes sense. Again, I don't think they're similar players. That's kind of the lineup slot comparison that I'm going to make. And yeah, again, like, I think at this point in the draft, like, you're getting guys who are going to be bottom-ish of your lineup players. But they're pretty, like, locked into being, like, that's kind of their floor as well, more or less. Unless things go really bad. Obviously, nobody's bust-proof, but more or less, right? Like, you're looking at guys who can be, like, bottom 6 forwards. I think Andrew Basha has that potential, and I think he's got an offensive game that could really complement a team's third line. And finally, my number 20 prospect is Sasha Beauvert. If I could pronounce names properly, that'd be great. Sasha Beauvert is a very good play driver who also has a very good shot. I was impressed with his ability to kind of shoot off the rush, and it really lended well to him in college, and I think it's going to fit really well at the University of North Dakota. His defensive game is solid. It's not like super high end, but it's solid, especially for this point in the draft. His hockey sense is kind of a question. I have concerns about his decision making at times. And his skating lacks explosiveness as well. This is somebody else who I think needs to improve that kind of explosion, that kind of second gear, right, 0 to 60 speed. He's a very raw prospect. And I think being in the NCAA program is going to be good for him because he can spend a bunch of time there developing, and then he can come in, maybe play in the AHL, and then step into an NHL roster. He's very raw. He's a project player, but I think the skills are there. Anytime you see somebody who's great off the rush, great in transition, who has a good shot, that kind of screams like there's potential for him to work out in some capacity in an NHL role. there's heavy risk here, but again, it's like heavy risk. I think the reward is kind of like medium-ish. So it depends on your risk tolerance at this point, on how you want to throw around late first-round picks. But for me, at this point, like I think there's enough upside to take the shot on them. Hope your development team can make it work and see what happens. But you're looking at a very raw player here at number 20, and that's kind of going to be the case for most players for the rest of the draft pretty well. The true like NHL like plug and play kind of guys have gone already. But that is just kind of how the NHL draft works every year. So that is my top 20 players. Obviously, again, like I said, 1 to 10 was in the video previous to this. It's 11 to 20, and 21 to 30 will be, or 21 to 32 will be hopefully either the end of this week or more likely the beginning of next week as we move into draft season on Friday. I also plan on possibly doing a live stream for the draft on Friday. Probably not on Saturday, but maybe for the first round. We'll see. It depends on if I can get everything set up properly in time. We'll see. Don't hold me to that, but it might be a thing. But yeah, like I love this time of year. Obviously, there's been a bunch of moves over the last couple days, and I have a pretty big series planned in the off season for July, August, and September. That'll kind of dive into a lot more of that. So that's why I'm not really putting my thoughts out in a video on all those. But if you want to know my initial thoughts, go follow me on Instagram, NBA Hockey, and I post on my story all the time. For like when news breaks, I kind of give my quick like 2-3 sentence thoughts on everything. But anyway, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like. Make sure you subscribe for more. I got stuff planned all summer and into next season. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know who you have ranked at 11 to 20 in the comments. See you in the next video.